Calvin Hayes was 42 years old, worked as a home health aide for an agency that paid him a modest $48,000 a year. And at precisely 8:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night that felt no different from 1,000 others, he was performing a task that had defined the last 4 years of his life. He was carrying his mother-in-law upstairs to bed. This was the 1,461st time he had done it. One lift for every single day, without fail, for 4 straight years. The number was seared into his mind, a silent tally he kept like a prisoner, marking days on a cell wall. His mother-in-law, Lorraine, was not a large woman, but at 160 pounds, she was a dead weight. Her 2016 stroke had left her left side mostly immobile, and her spirit curdled with a permanent simmering bitterness. Calvin's hands, calloused and strong, knew the exact points of leverage. One arm hooked securely under the bend of her knees, the other wrapped firmly around her back, his shoulder tucked just below her armpit. The technique was perfect, honed by years of repetition. It was the only way to navigate the narrow, suffocating staircase of their Park Heights row house, a building designed in an era when people were smaller and lives were simpler. "Watch my foot," Lorraine grumbled, her voice a dry rasp against his ear. Her left foot had bumped against the banister. It hadn't hurt her. She had little feeling there anyway. But it was a violation of the unspoken rule that her passage from the downstairs world to the upstairs world must be as smooth and untroubled as a queen being carried on a litter. "Sorry, Lorraine," Calvin murmured, his breath coming in controlled bursts. The muscles in his lower back, a complex network of knots and perpetually strained fibers, screamed in protest. He could feel a familiar, hot ache beginning to bloom just to the right of his spine. He spent at least $8 a month on a tube of extra-strength icy hot, a scent that now clung to him more persistently than any cologne. He took the stairs one at a time, his worn, $45 work boots finding their footing on the creaking wood. Each step was a small, calculated victory against gravity and fatigue. Below him, in the small living room, the blue light of the television flickered. His wife Denise was on the couch, a floral-patterned $60 fleece blanket pulled up to her chin, watching a reality show about impossibly wealthy women fighting in a restaurant. She didn't look up. She never did. The nightly ascent was as much a part of the house's soundscape as the hum of the old refrigerator or the rattle of the pipes when the heat kicked on. It was Calvin's job, a chore that had long ago shed any pretense of familial kindness and settled into the cold, hard category of expectation. He reached the top of the landing, his lungs burning. The small hallway was dark except for the dim glow of a $10 nightlight plugged into the wall, casting long, distorted shadows. He pivoted carefully, his body a finely tuned machine of strained ligaments, and maneuvered Lorraine through the doorway of her bedroom. The room smelled of lavender air freshener and the faint medicinal tang of her various creams and pills. He gently, so gently, lowered her onto the edge of her bed, a sturdy oak frame they had bought for $800 4 years ago, right after the stroke. Her face, illuminated by the bedside lamp, was a mask of stern dissatisfaction. He straightened up, rolling his shoulders, trying to work out the immediate kink in his back. "You're breathing too loud," she said. It wasn't a complaint, it was a statement of fact, another of his many failings. "Sorry, Lorraine, here, Karins, Sarin Irin, sorry, Ori," he said again. It was his most used phrase in this house. He helped her swing her legs onto the bed and positioned the mountain of pillows behind her back. He handed her the remote for her own small television, a 19-inch Scepter that had cost $89 at Walmart, and the glass of water she insisted on having on her nightstand. The routine was immutable. "Is that everything?" he asked, his voice gentle. She didn't answer. She was already clicking through the channels, her focus absolute. He was dismissed. Calvin stood in the doorway for a moment, his hand on the frame. His deep brown skin was luminous, even in the dim light, but it was pulled taut over his cheekbones. He looked tired. He looked older than his 42 years. He turned and walked back down the stairs, the wood groaning under his weight, each step a descent back into a life that felt like it was shrinking around him, day by day, lift by lift. He had no idea that this familiar, crushing routine was about to be shattered by two simple words. And he had no idea that the silent tally he kept in his head was about to come to a sudden and final end. But tonight was not that night. Tonight was just Tuesday. Tonight was lift number 1460. What was he supposed to do? This was a question that plagued many, but for Calvin, it felt like a trap with no exit. Have you ever been in a situation where doing the right thing felt like it was slowly erasing you? Share your story in the comments below. We find strength in knowing we're not alone. The arrangement hadn't started as a life sentence. It had begun, as these things often do, with a crisis and a promise. 4 years ago, Lorraine had been at her own home, a slightly larger but equally aged row house in the same Park Heights neighborhood, when the stroke hit. The call had come to Denise at her job, a mid-level administrative position at a downtown law firm that paid her a respectable $65,000 a year. Calvin had been at his own job, helping an elderly client in Roland Park when Denise had called him, her voice tight with panic. The hospital vigil had been a blur of fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic, and hushed conversations with doctors who spoke in acronyms. When the dust settled, the prognosis was clear. Lorraine had survived, but her life, and by extension theirs, was permanently altered. She could no longer live alone. The left side of her body was weak, her mobility was severely limited, and she would require constant daily assistance. The family meeting took place in a sterile, beige-colored conference room at the hospital. It consisted of Calvin, Denise, and Denise's brother, Marcus, a man who lived 2 hours away in Virginia, and whose contribution to the family was mostly limited to sending a $100 check on birthdays. "She can't come live with me," Marcus said immediately, his hands held up in surrender. "Janine and I, we just don't have the space. And with my travel schedule for work..." He let the sentence hang, the implication clear. His life was too important, too busy. All eyes turned to Denise. She wrung her hands, her expression a careful performance of sorrow and duty. "Of course she'll come live with us," she said, her voice catching theatrically. She placed a hand on Calvin's arm. "We'll make it work. Calvin is so good at this stuff. It's what he does for a living." Calvin felt a cold dread seep into his stomach. He loved his wife, but he knew this tone. This was the tone she used when she was volunteering him for something he didn't want to do. "Baby, you're strong," she'd said to him later that night as they cleared out their small guest room, packing away the boxes of old photo albums and winter clothes to make space for a hospital bed. "You can lift her, and you know all the exercises and things. It'll just be for a few months, until she gets her strength back. We'll save so much money not having to hire someone." The few months had bled into a year, then 2, then 4. Lorraine's strength never returned to the point of independence, and her will to try seemed to evaporate entirely. The temporary arrangement calcified into the permanent structure of their lives. Calvin's existence became a series of domestic duties, performed around the gravitational pull of Lorraine. He quit the agency he worked for because the hours were too unpredictable. He took on a few private clients, people who needed help for a few hours here and there, piecing together an income that barely touched $48,000. It was less than he'd made before, but it gave him the flexibility their new life demanded. Their home, once a quiet sanctuary for two, became Lorraine's domain. Her medications lined the kitchen counter, a colorful arsenal of orange plastic bottles. Her walker was a permanent fixture in the living room, a metal tripod they were constantly tripping over. The television was always tuned to her game shows, the volume cranked to a deafening level. Calvin's life was a masterclass in domestic normalcy, a facade of routine that masked the slow-motion demolition of his own identity. He did the grocery shopping, his cart filled with the bland, low-sodium foods Lorraine required. Plain chicken breasts, $3.99 a pound, bags of frozen vegetables, $1.50 each, large canisters of oatmeal, $4. His weekly bill at the local ShopRite rarely exceeded $90 for the three of them. Meanwhile, Denise would come home from work, dropping a shopping bag from a downtown boutique on the kitchen table. Inside might be a new silk blouse for $150 or a pair of leather gloves that cost $80. Retail therapy, she'd say with a shrug. My boss was a nightmare today. He cooked every meal. He'd stand at the stove stirring a large pot of lentil soup that cost less than $10 to make and would provide 3 days of lunches, while Denise sat at the small kitchen table scrolling through her phone, showing him pictures of a $3,500 vacation package to Jamaica. Doesn't that look amazing? Maybe one day when things with Mama are more settled. He did the laundry, carefully washing Lorraine's delicate items separately. He mowed the tiny postage stamp-sized lawn in the back. He was the one who dealt with the plumber when the ancient pipes in the basement finally gave out, a repair that cost them $650 from their dwindling joint savings account. He was the one who stayed up with Lorraine when a bad cough kept her awake all night, sitting in a hard-backed chair by her bed, listening to her labored breathing. His presence in the house had become functional. His possessions were confined to one side of the bedroom closet and a single nightstand. The walls were decorated with photos of Denise and her family. There were no pictures of Calvin's parents, who had passed away years ago. There was no space for his hobbies. His old woodworking tools gathered dust in a corner of the damp basement. The man he used to be, the man who liked to build things and go for long drives on weekends, had been subsumed by the caregiver. He was a ghost in his own home, his only tangible purpose manifesting at 8:47 p.m. each night when he transformed into a human crane to lift a woman who barely tolerated his existence. The accumulation of outrage was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, quiet layering of sediment, one cruel remark and dismissive gesture at a time, until the weight became unbearable. Each incident on its own was something a reasonable man could dismiss, something a loving husband could forgive. But together, they formed a mountain of disrespect that was slowly burying Calvin alive. The first truly deep cut came on their 10th wedding anniversary. Calvin had been planning it for weeks. He knew money was tight, or at least that's what Denise always told him. So he didn't aim for extravagance. He wanted something thoughtful. He found a delicate, sterling silver locket at a small jewelry store in Hampton, paying $75 for it in cash he had saved by skipping lunches for a month. He cooked Denise's favorite meal, salmon with roasted asparagus and a lemon dill sauce. It cost him nearly $40, a significant splurge on their budget. He set the table with the good plates, the ones they never used, and lit 2 candles. When Denise walked in from work, she glanced at the table, her brow furrowed. "What's all this?" she asked, dropping her $2,400 Burberry trench coat over a chair. "Happy anniversary," Calvin said, his smile feeling fragile. Her face went blank for a beat too long. "Oh my God, is that today? Honey, I am so sorry. With everything going on with Mama, my mind is just a complete sieve." It totally slipped. From the living room, Lorraine's voice cut through the air like a shard of glass. "An anniversary is for a man to remember and a woman to enjoy. If she forgot, it's because you didn't make it memorable enough." Calvin felt the warmth in the room chill. Denise offered a weak, apologetic smile. "You know how she is?" She opened the small, wrapped box and looked at the locket. "Oh, it's Simple. It's nice. She put it on the counter, where it sat for the rest of the evening, forgotten. They ate the expensive salmon in near silence, the flickering candles illuminating a distance between them that felt wider than the small table. A few months later, his 2012 Toyota Camry, a car with 187,000 hard-earned miles on it, began making a terrible grinding noise. The mechanic at the local garage on Belvedere Avenue was blunt. Your transmission is shot. To rebuild it, you're looking at close to $1,000. Honestly, for a car this old, you should think about getting something else. Getting something else was an impossibility. A $1,000 repair was a catastrophe. That night, he approached Denise as she was balancing her checkbook. "The car needs a new transmission," he said, the words tasting like ash. "It's going to be about $900. She sighed, a dramatic put-upon sound. "900? Calvin, where are we supposed to get that kind of money?" "What about the joint savings?" he asked. They were supposed to put a little away each month. "It's gone," she said, not looking at him. "I had to get Mama a new pressure relief cushion for her chair. The Deluxe gel one the therapist recommended, it was $600. And her new supplements from the holistic place, those were another $200. They aren't cheap, you know." He knew he should let it go, but a strange, bitter curiosity pushed him. A week later, while looking for a stamp in her desk drawer, he saw a credit card statement peeking out from under a pile of papers. His eyes scanned the line items. He saw the $600 charge for the medical supply store. But right below it was another charge, from the same day. Tranquil Waters Spa and Salon, $450. The transaction description read, "Girls' Day Out Package for 2. He felt a wave of cold fury, followed immediately by a familiar, weary resignation. He put the statement back, closed the drawer, and said nothing. He ended up borrowing the $900 from his own brother, a loan that felt like a profound humiliation. The verbal cuts came just as frequently, and often in public. Calvin was meticulous about Lorraine's care. He took her to every doctor's appointment, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the hospital, advocating for her, taking detailed notes. During one checkup, her primary care physician, a kind man named Dr. Evans, reviewed her chart and examined her limbs. "Her muscle tone is holding up remarkably well, considering," he said, looking at Calvin with genuine admiration. "You're doing an amazing job with her physical therapy, Mr. Hayes. Truly, this level of maintenance at home is rare and commendable." Calvin felt a flush of pride. It was a rare acknowledgement of his tireless, unseen work. He helped Lorraine back into her wheelchair and took her down to the car. She was unusually silent on the drive back to Park Heights. The moment they were inside the house, she called for Denise. "That Dr. Evans is a fool," Lorraine announced, her voice dripping with disdain. "He just wants to get his copay and rush us out the door. He didn't even listen to my heart properly." She then gestured a weak, trembling hand toward Calvin. "And this one," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "he's too rough with me. I think he enjoys it when I'm in pain. Today, in the car, he nearly dropped me getting me in. He's careless." Calvin stared at her, his mouth agape. It was a shocking, blatant lie. He had transferred her into the car with the same painstaking care he always used. Denise looked from her mother's aggrieved face to Calvin's stunned one. She patted her mother's hand. "Now, Mama, I'm sure he didn't mean to. You have to be more careful, Calvin. She's fragile." She didn't defend him. She didn't question the lie. She simply accepted her mother's narrative, repositioning him as the one at fault. The ultimate devaluation, however, came during a small family get-together for Easter. Denise's auntie and a few cousins came over. Calvin had spent 2 days cooking. He'd made a baked ham, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, and a sweet potato pie from scratch. He was shuttling between the kitchen and the living room, serving plates, refilling glasses, the gracious host who was also the unpaid caterer. Denise's Auntie Rose, a large, warm woman with a booming laugh, took a bite of the macaroni and cheese. Calvin, you put your foot in this. You are a saint from heaven for what you do for Lorraine and this whole family. Before Calvin could even offer a modest thank you, Lorraine scoffed from her specialized armchair, a sound like tearing paper. A saint? It's the least he can do. He lives here rent-free, doesn't he? The air in the room thickened. The cousins suddenly found their shoes fascinating. Denise, seeing the awkwardness, jumped in with a brittle, bright laugh. "Mama, be nice," she chirped. But then she turned to Auntie Rose and added, "But you know she does have a point. It's a team effort. We all chip in around here." A team effort. With those 3 words, Denise and her mother had reframed 4 years of his life. 1,460 lifts, thousands of meals cooked, countless hours of cleaning, driving, and patient care. It was not a sacrifice. It was not an act of love. It was rent. He was not a husband, not a son-in-law, not a caregiver. He was a tenant, paying his way with his body and his time. He looked at his wife, who smiled at him as if she had just smoothed everything over, and he felt a profound and terrifying loneliness. The outrage had accumulated. The foundation of his life in that house had been eroded to dust. All it would take was one more tremor for the whole structure to collapse. The tremor came on a rainy Tuesday night in October. The day had been long and dreary, the sky a uniform, depressing shade of gray. Rain had been falling since morning, a steady, miserable drizzle that seeped into the bones and dampened the spirit. Calvin felt it in his back, a low, throbbing ache that was his constant companion. He went through the evening routine with an almost robotic efficiency. He served dinner, a simple chicken,